I got home from a job fixing a ruptured main under someone's kitchen sink, covered in grime, smelling like rust and mildew, and the first thing I saw when I pulled into my driveway was a guy in a reflective vest spray painting bright orange lines across my lawn. He looked up like I'd just interrupted him mid-prayer. "Oh hey," he said, like we were neighbors at a barbecue. "We're marking the path for the Cedar Ridge Green Walk. You'll be getting the notice soon. HOA approval went through last week." I stared at him for a second, then at the mess of lines stretching across my backyard all the way to my workshop. And then I looked over at the new sign they'd staked right into my flower bed. Future Public Trail, a Cedar Ridge community project. Right, through my yard. I didn't say a word, just got out of the truck, walked around to the back, and pulled out a shovel. Not for him, obviously. I just like to carry something heavy when I'm trying not to swing. To his credit, the guy left pretty quick after that. Took his little spray rig and bolted like I was about to salt the earth behind him. And if you think that was the weird part of my week, buckle up. That was just the opening act. It's funny how a quiet place can become a battleground overnight. 2 years ago, when my Uncle Bob passed and left me the property, I thought I'd finally gotten a piece of peace. The kind of land that didn't come with monthly dues, Facebook drama, or someone telling you your trash cans weren't aesthetically compliant. Turns out, that kind of land paints a target on your back in a place like Cedar Ridge. My name's Curtis Bell. I'm a plumber by trade, stubborn by nature, and just decent enough with my hands that most of what you see on my property I built or fixed myself. The house used to belong to Bob, my dad's older brother, but really he was the only father I ever knew. Raised me after the accident, took me in when I was 10 and kept me fed, taught, and halfway civilized till I was old enough to screw it up myself. He built the place with his own hands in the early 70s. Nothing fancy, single-story rancher, full basement, real wood siding, and a backyard deep enough to host a minor league ball game. And out back, just beyond the garden bed, stood the workshop. That was his pride. Cedar walls, heavy double doors, and a sign over the entrance that just said, "Fix it." Inside was his bench, big, solid, custom-built. Every notch and scratch told a story. I learned how to solder copper pipe on that bench. Learned to sharpen blades, change brake pads, carve dovetail joints. Underneath the top, carved into the wood, are the words, "Curtis, use your hands, use your head, use your name with care." I didn't cry at Bob's funeral. I cried 2 days later, sitting at that bench, smelling sawdust and motor oil and that faint trace of peppermint tobacco he used to chew when he thought I wasn't looking. That bench isn't just furniture, it's the last piece of the man who made me, and now someone wants to cut a jogging trail through it. For community wellness. Blair Hennings. That's her name. She didn't spray the paint herself, of course not. She's the brand new president of the Cedar Ridge HOA, and from the moment she moved in last fall with her pre-lit wreaths and Tesla charger, I could smell the control complex from 2 blocks away. You ever meet someone who smiles like she's already figured out how she's going to win the argument? That's Blair. She called my place an opportunity for improvement the first time we met. I should have known then. Back then, it was just concerns about non-uniform structures and the potential for integration into community planning. Now it's a stake in my garden and paint on my grass. And the thing is, my house, my land, it was never part of their HOA. Bob made damn sure of that. He bought this plot back when it was just woods and deer trails. When developers came knocking, offering buyouts and sweet talk, he told them where to stick their covenants, and he put it in writing. Which is why Blair's little green trail? It's not a suggestion, it's a full-on land grab. And as much as I hate paperwork and politics, they just picked the wrong man to dig in on. The first red flag didn't come with sirens, it came with a pastel-colored envelope. I found it taped to my mailbox one morning, no stamp, just a folded HOA notice sealed with a sticker that said, "Your neighborhood matters." I opened it while walking back up the drive, already annoyed, and sure enough, it was a friendly reminder that my house's exterior paint didn't match the approved earth tone palette outlined in the Cedar Ridge Design Harmony Guidelines. Now, mind you, my house is gray, just plain gray. Not neon green, not black, with red trim. Gray. It's been gray since my uncle built it, and it looked just fine until Blair Hennings decided to weaponize beige. At first, I laughed. Crumpled the letter, tossed it in the recycling, figured it was a mistake. After all, I wasn't part of their HOA. That little technicality where I don't actually fall under their jurisdiction, I assumed it would slow them down a bit. It didn't. A week later, I got a second notice. This one came certified mail. Same nonsense, but with second violation in bold red font and a line at the bottom that read, "Failure to comply may result in penalties or corrective action under the Cedar Ridge Charter." Charter, huh? That's funny. You'd think a group of neighbors playing pretend government would at least have the decency to check a property line. But that wasn't even the weirdest part. The weirdest part was the map they included. This was a printout showing all of Cedar Ridge with little color-coded outlines around each house. My property? It had a faint dotted line wrapped around it and a footnote that read, "Pending reintegration approval, documentation in process." I stared at that like it was written in Martian. Reintegration? As if I was the prodigal house that left the fold and now had to be brought back into the beige-colored arms of community compliance? I called the number on the notice just to see how deep the rabbit hole went. "Cedar Ridge HOA, this is Janine." I introduced myself, gave her my address, and asked what the hell this was about. "Oh, yes, Mr. Bell. You're part of the reintegration initiative." "What reintegration? I've never been part of the HOA. This property isn't under your jurisdiction." She hesitated. "Well, we've reviewed the plat maps and found that your property was intended to be part of the development. There was a clerical error when the original parcels were filed, but the board has voted to include your home going forward." That's when it clicked. They weren't confused. They weren't mistaken. They were making it up as they went along. "Well, Janine," I said, keeping my voice calm, "until someone shows me a legally binding agreement that says otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and keep my property gray. And private. Appreciate the letter, though." She went quiet for a second, then said, "You may want to speak directly with President Hennings if you have concerns." Oh, I had concerns, but I didn't need to speak with Blair to know what was happening. This wasn't about paint. It was a toe in the door. The funny thing about people like Blair is they never start with what they really want. They start small. A paint complaint here, a suggestion about fencing there, and before you know it, they're drawing lines on your lawn and calling it progress. I hung up, walked back to the house, and pulled the trash bin to the curb. But I kept that second notice, figured I'd be needing a paper trail. About 3 weeks after the paint incident, things took a turn, and by turn, I mean they went straight off the rails and through my back fence. It started with a knock at the door just after 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was still in boxers and drinking my first coffee, so I peeked through the side window expecting maybe a package or a neighbor needing jumper cables. Nope. It was a city code enforcement officer with a clipboard standing next to some guy in khakis and a Cedar Ridge HOA polo who looked like he'd never held a tool in his life but was very proud of his clip-on name tag. Ron, Community Compliance Partner. I stepped outside, mug in hand. No shirt, no smile. "You boys need something?" Clipboard guy cleared his throat like this was going to be a delicate interaction. "Mr. Bell, we've received a formal complaint about unpermitted structures on your property, specifically the detached outbuilding in the rear." I blinked. "You mean my workshop?" He nodded. "According to the document submitted, it may be in violation of municipal code sections regarding height and distance from lot lines." I almost spit my coffee. "That building's been there since 1974. You can't swing a wrench in this town without hitting something older than that. Who submitted the complaint?" Khaki Ron jumped in with a customer service smile so forced it looked like it hurt. "The Cedar Ridge HOA flagged it as part of a community audit. It's standard. We're working to improve neighborhood consistency and safety." I looked him dead in the eye. "You guys planning to audit the Statue of Liberty next?" He didn't laugh. They handed me a yellow warning notice and said I'd be receiving a follow-up in the mail. Then they left, all self-importance and clipboards, like they'd just secured the perimeter. I stood in my yard for a while after they left, just looking at my shop. It's not some rickety shed. It's a proper structure, cedar walls, insulated, wired. The bench inside has held up hundreds of projects and held me up more times than I can count. And they were targeting it on purpose. They knew exactly what that building was. It didn't stop there. The next week I got a notice claiming my vegetable garden was exceeding acceptable visual density. Visual density, like I'd planted too many tomatoes for the vibes. I laughed when I read it until I walked out back and found that someone had actually taken a photo of my yard from inside the fence line. That's when it hit me. Someone had been on my property. I checked the side gate. It wasn't latched. I always latch it. Always. Then I saw the broken flower stalks near the path and the faint boot print in the dirt behind my shed. They weren't just sending letters anymore. They were coming onto my land. I filed a trespassing report. Cop came out, nodded sympathetically, said he'd write it up, but I could tell it wasn't going anywhere. Cedar Ridge wasn't big, and people like Blair had her fingers in enough pies to keep most things quiet. He actually said, and I quote, "Sometimes it's best to just get along, Mr. Bell." Yeah, I bet he said that to his barber, too, when he screwed up his haircut and just lived with it for 6 weeks. But the real gut punch came that Friday. I got home from a late service call and headed out to the shop to unwind, maybe sand down that little oak side table I'd been picking away at. When I opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Motor oil and mold. Then I saw the bench. The workbench. My uncle's bench. The front leg had been kicked in and the whole thing was listing sideways. One drawer was half open, the side panel cracked like it had been hit with something heavy. His name, Bob, carved right above mine, was scratched over in black marker, like someone was trying to erase it. I just stood there, breathing through my teeth, no shouting, no theatrics, just hollow. That bench was older than most of the houses in Cedar Ridge. It was built with care, with hands that loved the work. It had outlasted hurricanes and roof leaks and 30 years of hard use, and now it was vandalized, on purpose. I sat down on the concrete floor next to the ruined leg and just stared at the wood grain for a long time. They weren't sending messages anymore. They were making moves, and I finally understood what Blair was doing. This wasn't about property values or paint colors or walkable neighborhoods. This was about control. They wanted my land because it connected the two halves of the Cedar Ridge development. If they got my lot, they could open a straight shot to the lake, add a greenbelt, inflate home prices. I was just the last holdout on the map, and they thought they could scare me into giving up. Break something sacred, make it personal. Well, they did. The next Monday, I did what decent people are supposed to do. I went to City Hall. I shaved, wore jeans without holes, even left my truck at home and borrowed my neighbor's clean sedan because I figured, hey, optics. Maybe if I looked like someone worth listening to, they'd actually hear me out. I had everything printed and in a neat little folder, the original property deed from Uncle Bob, a plat map showing I was clearly outside HOA boundaries, and photos of the vandalism, one of the busted workbench, one of the spray-painted fence, and the boot print in the garden for good measure. The clerk at the zoning office gave me the kind of smile you give someone who's about to hear bad news. You know the one. Half polite, half pity. Mr. Bell, she said, flipping through my paperwork like it was a menu, you're not currently listed under any active zoning disputes, but the Cedar Ridge HOA filed a boundary review petition 2 months ago. Boundary review? It's a request to formally expand their charter to include previously unincorporated properties. Like mine. She nodded, tight-lipped. The hearing was last week. I felt my stomach drop. I didn't get a hearing notice, no letter, no email, nothing. How was I supposed to know about this? They posted notice in the Cedar Ridge community newsletter. I stared at her. You mean the newsletter I don't get because I'm not in the HOA? She blinked. Well, yes. It was the kind of bureaucratic loop that makes your blood pressure spike. I asked if there was an appeal process. She pulled out a pamphlet. So now, I was supposed to fill out a form, pay $275 in fees, and request a special exception hearing just to keep what was already legally mine? I thanked her. Honestly, she was just the messenger, and left before I started yelling. That afternoon, I called a lawyer. Local guy. I'd done work on his sink once, and he still owed me a favor. He looked over the paperwork and sighed. You're not in the HOA. That's good. But they're playing the long game. If they can show that your land provides essential access to a designated community feature, they can apply for a conditional use permit. Basically eminent domain with sprinkles. And the vandalism? I asked. He shrugged. Hard to prove unless you caught them in the act. HOA will say it was neighborhood kids. They always do. So I filed a police report. Again. This time I brought photos, even gave them the boot print. The officer on duty, different guy this time, glanced at the photos, nodded, and said, We'll take a look, but unless you have a video or witness, there's not much we can do. I didn't have cameras, because I never thought I'd need them. I live in a sleepy cul-de-sac with retirees and families who wave when you drive by. I fix sinks and mow my lawn and help neighbors patch fences. And yet here I was, being told my entire property might be repurposed for community benefit, while my workshop was getting trashed in the dark. I even tried talking to Blair directly. I caught her at a community beautification event they were throwing at the park across the street from the HOA clubhouse. She was handing out branded tote bags and talking about native plantings when I walked up and said, calm as I could, Hi Blair, we need to talk. You're messing with the wrong property. She smiled like I'd just complimented her blouse. Curtis, hello, I was hoping you'd come around. We'd love for you to be more involved. Cut the crap, I said, keeping my tone level. I'm not part of your HOA. You know it. The paint violations, the trespassing, the fake complaints about my shed. I've got records. She didn't even blink. The neighborhood is evolving, Curtis. Change is hard, but this is for the greater good. A green corridor will raise values and improve walkability. Your land is in the center of that plan." I clenched my jaw. My land isn't yours to plan around. She tilted her head like I was a stubborn toddler refusing to share a toy. "Technically, that's still under review, and if you continue to be uncooperative, you may face further action." "Are you threatening me?" Her smile got wider. "I'm simply informing you of the process." That was it. That was my final olive branch. No yelling, no theatrics. I played it straight, did everything right. Paperwork, meetings, police reports, legal advice. And all it got me was gaslighting and a $275 form to argue over my own backyard. They thought I'd fold, that I'd get tired, give in, maybe move. But what they didn't know, what Blair still didn't get, was that I'd already buried too much of my life to let anyone dig up what was left. And I wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. I was about ready to burn the whole HOA charter in a fire pit and salt the ashes when the twist hit me, hard and out of nowhere, on a Sunday afternoon. It started with a knock on the door, not a clipboard knock, not a sheriff's department knock, just a slow, polite tap like someone didn't want to bother me if I was in the middle of eating ribs or watching the game. I opened it and there stood a guy I hadn't seen in probably 30 years. "Curtis Bell?" he asked, like he wasn't sure I was still the same kid who used to climb trees barefoot and throw dirt clods at his brother. "Yeah?" I squinted at him. "It's Danny Whitlow. My granddad used to live next door to your Uncle Bob back in the day, remember?" Now, the name hit me like a hammer to the chest. Old Man Whitlow, that gruff, cigar-chomping former city planner who used to cuss at squirrels and had a heart attack trying to fix his gutter in July of '92. "Damn," I said, stepping back. "Danny, you were like 12 last time I saw you." "Yeah," he grinned, sheepish. "Now I'm 42 with a mortgage and gout. Anyway, I heard you're having some issues with the HOA. Figured I should come by." I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, and he pulled a yellowed file folder out of a backpack that had definitely seen better days. "I found this when we were cleaning out my parents' attic. It's from my granddad's city records stash, stuff he wasn't technically supposed to keep." He slid the folder across the table. I opened it. Inside was a full survey map dated 1986, stamped and signed by the city, with all the property lines for this part of the county. My uncle's land? Not just marked outside the HOA zone, it had a double bold outline around it with a handwritten note in the margin that stopped me cold. "Parcel number 76, permanently excluded from future HOA jurisdiction per council resolution. November 14th, 1986. Transfer of adjacent parcel C12 accepted in exchange for exemption. No future zoning claims permitted." I read that 5 times before I said anything. Then I pulled out the parcel index from my own deed and matched the numbers. Same lot, no question. That note wasn't some scribble on a napkin. It was in ink, filed, stamped, notarized. "What's parcel C12? I asked, flipping pages. Danny leaned back. "That was the wooded area behind the development. Bob gave it up when the city wanted land for the flood mitigation project. They built that runoff basin there in the 90s. He traded that section for a guarantee that the rest of his land would be untouchable. It was a big deal at the time." "And nobody at the HOA knows this?" He snorted. "They weren't around then. Half the people on the current board probably think the neighborhood was delivered by Amazon in 2010. I stared at the page again. Bob didn't just keep them out. He negotiated immunity. Legal immunity. The HOA had no claim, no authority, and if they were trying to reinstate jurisdiction now, that wasn't just arrogant, that was fraud. It also explained why they'd been sneaky about the notices, the hearing, the paint letters. They didn't have a legal leg to stand on. They were hoping I didn't know the history, that I'd roll over or fight in circles long enough to get worn down. But they didn't count on a guy like Danny walking in with the equivalent of a nuke inside a manila folder. "Can I keep this?" I asked, already sliding the papers back inside like they were made of gold leaf. "Absolutely," he said. "You should also know, my granddad used to rant about this deal all the time. Said if the city ever tried to backtrack, he'd haunt them. And I don't mean metaphorically." We both laughed. But I wasn't laughing when I made copies of that survey 3 times over and put one in my safe, one in my glove box, and one in an envelope I addressed to a lawyer. Because now it wasn't just about protecting my workshop or Uncle Bob's bench. Now it was about exposing a cover-up. They didn't just try to take my land, they tried to erase history. And now I had the proof to burn the whole charade to the ground. By Monday morning I had a plan. Not a yell at a meeting and hope they back down kind of plan. No, this was the slow-cooked, precision-cut kind, the kind Uncle Bob would have called measure twice, drive it through their skulls once. First thing I did was call my lawyer buddy, Alan, the one who still owed me for fixing the copper line under his kitchen that one Thanksgiving. I sent him copies of the survey and the exemption clause, highlighted in 3 colors like a kid doing extra credit. His reply? Holy hell, Curtis, you're sitting on a powder keg. Yes, I was. While Alan prepped the legal end, I started laying groundwork for something a little more public. See, Blair and the HOA had been real fond of doing everything behind closed doors. Newsletters nobody read, hearings they didn't invite me to, community improvement meetings held at 2 p.m. on weekdays like normal people don't have jobs. So I decided to bring the light to them. I pulled out my laptop, dusted off my very unused Facebook account, and made a post on the local community group. Just a friendly little write-up with a photo of my busted workbench and a caption that read, "When your property's not in the HOA, but they try to bulldoze it anyway. Anyone else getting creative notices lately?" It took off like dry grass in July. Turns out I wasn't the only one. A couple folks chimed in that they'd been getting similar vague letters. Nothing serious yet, but suggestions about paint colors and porch decor, especially if their homes bordered the new proposed Cedar Ridge Green Walk. One guy, retired Air Force, big handlebar mustache, said his wife caught someone measuring their hedges at 6:30 in the morning. By that evening, I had a dozen private messages from people asking what I knew and what they could do. One woman even sent me a copy of a newsletter where Blair actually name-dropped my property as the missing link in our trail network. She wrote it like I was a weed patch they were planning to mow, so I made a second post, this time with a scanned copy of the 1986 city survey. I blacked out the legal ID number but left everything else visible. In big red letters, I circled the words, "Permanently excluded from HOA jurisdiction." Then I wrote, "For those wondering, this is what the HOA didn't want me, or any of you, to find. My uncle made a deal to protect this land. Now they're pretending it doesn't exist. Ask yourself, if they're willing to lie about this, what else are they doing behind closed doors?" By the next morning, the post had over 300 shares. Even the Yoga Mom group had picked it up, which I only knew because someone texted me a screenshot of a post with the caption, "Is this why the HOA wants to take that poor man's tomatoes?" And I started getting calls from people I hadn't talked to in years. But the real game changer came when an old buddy of mine, James Tran, used to run AV at the high school, reached out. He works for one of the local news stations now, not a major network, but enough reach to make things uncomfortable for the Blair Hennings of the world. "You ready to go on camera?" he asked me. I wasn't. I hate cameras. I'm a plumber, not a politician. But I also wasn't ready to let them keep walking over people like me just because we didn't speak HOA fluently. So I told James, "Yeah, but we're doing it from my shop, and you're getting a close-up of that bench." He said, "You got it." While James got the story rolling on his end, I filed a formal cease and desist against the HOA with the city clerk, this time backed by the 1986 exemption and notarized copies of every document I could find. Alan drafted a statement with enough legalese to make Shakespeare throw up. Words like bad faith misrepresentation, fraudulent boundary assertion, and my favorite, intentional breach of post-zoning immunity. Sounded like a Harry Potter spell for "you're about to be sued." I had the law in my back pocket. I had the public on my side, and most importantly, I had something Blair didn't, the truth. And now I was about to serve it to her, hot, loud, and live on the 6 o'clock news. The counterattack started on a Thursday, not because it was symbolic or strategic, just because that's when James said the news segment would air. 6:07 p.m., Channel 5, right after the weather. But the setup, that was all me. I spent the day cleaning up the shop, not too much, just enough that it didn't look like a hoarder's garage. I left the busted leg on Uncle Bob's bench exactly as it was, propped up but cracked, with the marker scratches still visible. When James and his cameraman showed up, I greeted them in my usual way. Handshake, coffee, and a warning that I wasn't shaving for this. He laughed and said, "No one trusts a guy with a perfect jawline anyway." We recorded for an hour. I walked them through the whole mess, starting with the fake paint violations, the boundary redraws, the trespassing, the vandalism. Then I dropped the hammer, the 1986 exemption. James lit up like a kid on Christmas. "This is airtight," he said. "They messed with the wrong guy." "Tell Blair that," I said. He smiled. "I will, but I'm going to let 10,000 other people do it first." That night, the piece aired. It wasn't just some short blip on the crawl. It was a full 5-minute segment. They used drone footage of the property, close-ups of the broken bench, clips of me talking about how Bob built this place with his bare hands and a stubborn streak. Then they showed the survey, zoomed in on the words, "permanently excluded." And then came the kicker. James read Blair's HOA newsletter. quote back to back with the legal map, over B-roll of that future green path sign sticking out of my flower bed like a middle finger. By 7 o'clock, my phone was blowing up. Neighbors I hadn't heard from in months were texting things like, "Hell yes, and she's gonna flip." One woman offered to bake me a pie, I'm not even kidding. But I wasn't done. I printed flyers, just a few dozen, and taped them to the HOA bulletin board, the clubhouse doors, and the mail kiosks. Big bold letters at the top. Know your rights. HOA overreach exposed. Underneath was a copy of the exemption clause and the quote from Blair where she called my lot non-compliant. Then I added this line. They tried to take what wasn't theirs. Don't let them do it to you next. By Friday morning, it was chaos. 3 more homeowners sent me photos of their own questionable violation notices. Stuff about decorative inconsistency, whatever that means. One guy said they fined him for having excessive wind chimes. Turns out, the green walk wasn't just supposed to cut through my yard, it was going to snake past 7 other properties. They just hadn't told those homeowners yet. Then came the community meeting. Now, normally, HOA meetings draw maybe 12 people, mostly board members and 2 retirees arguing about shrub height. This time, the place was packed. I got there 10 minutes early and they had to set up folding chairs. People brought printouts of the news article, some brought popcorn. Someone had even made a sign that said, "No trail without a trial." That one got a good laugh. Blair walked in 5 minutes late. She looked like someone had hit her with a leaf blower full of bad press. Her smile was tighter than ever, and her heels clicked like she was trying to hold on to authority with each step. She started with a prepared statement, some bland corporate word salad about clarity and misunderstandings in boundary documentation. Then she opened the floor for questions. Big mistake. A woman stood up and said, "Why are you pushing a trail through private property?" Blair tried to spin it. "We had reason to believe the property was eligible." I raised my hand. "Correction," I said, loud and clear. "You knew it wasn't. You just hoped I wouldn't." I stepped forward, pulled the folded city map from my back pocket, and handed copies to the board. "This document is stamped and notarized. The parcel was exempted from HOA control by a 1986 resolution in exchange for donated land you built your flood basin on. This was never your land to plan anything through." People started murmuring. I kept going. "And you knew that, because the current development records list that exemption, but you left it out of the public trail proposal." Then I dropped the final piece, a screenshot of an email someone on the HOA board forwarded to me anonymously. Blair had written it 6 months ago. "If we wait for him to cave, we can justify inclusion retroactively. He's just one guy." I read it out loud. The room went silent. Then someone shouted, "She needs to step down." Another person echoed it. Then another. The vote to suspend Blair passed 31 to 2. The 2 were Blair and Ron, the clipboard guy. Of course, they didn't even wait for her to pack up. She walked out with her tote bag, head high, face flushed, trying to pretend it wasn't the single worst night of her HOA reign. After she left, one of the board members, an older guy named Carl, turned to me and said, "Curtis, you want to sit on the board?" I just shook my head. Hell no, I've already got enough plumbing problems in my life. The crowd laughed, and just like that, the tide turned. The HOA wasn't dissolved, but it was gutted. People started talking about actual reform, transparency, opt-outs, limits on project scope. And as for my property? Untouchable, officially and loudly. By Saturday morning, Blair Hennings was the most famous HOA president in the Tri-County area, and not in the good way. Channel 5 had picked up steam and syndicated the story across a few affiliate stations. Then it hit the internet. Someone posted the segment on the local subreddit with the title, Sibberge, HOA tries to steal veterans' land for a walking path, gets legally drop-kicked. That wasn't exactly accurate. I'm not a vet, but apparently if you're over 50, own tools, and aren't terrified of standing up to someone in slacks, the internet just assumes you did time in Fallujah. Didn't matter. The story blew up. By Monday, it had over 12,000 shares on Facebook, and Blair's face was a meme. My favorite one had her smiling in front of a bulldozer with the caption, "This land is my land. Just kidding, it's Curtis's." Even the HOA's own website got hacked. Nothing serious, just someone changing the header to say, "Cedar Ridge HOA, we put the no in property ownership." I can't say I condone that, but I also can't say I didn't take a screenshot. The public exposure did what years of complaining never could. It made people mad. Not just in Cedar Ridge, around it. Neighbors in other developments started digging into their own HOA documents. Some found clauses that let the board inspect their backyards without notice. One guy realized he was paying dues for a shared gazebo that hadn't existed since 2008. And while they were all spinning out, Blair was spiraling in. Her husband, Doug, nice enough guy if a little too into backyard fire pits, stepped down from the zoning committee 3 days after the broadcast. Coincidence? Sure. Her real estate license? Under emergency review by the state board. Apparently, listing someone's home as a future pedestrian corridor without their knowledge doesn't sit well with licensing ethics panels. By the end of the week, the HOA held a second emergency meeting, this time open to everyone, with a livestream link and real reporters in the room. They invited me to speak. I told them I didn't need to. I'd already said what mattered. But I showed up anyway. Sat in the front row with my arms crossed while they read off the list of changes. Blair's permanent removal from all board activity. A freeze on the Green Walk project. A formal apology letter to me, signed by the remaining board. A new rule requiring 100% written consent before any property can be considered for inclusion in HOA initiatives. That last one, they named it the Bell Clause. Which honestly sounds like a horror movie, but hey, I'll take it. After the vote passed, someone from the audience handed me a beer. It wasn't even open, just cold and symbolic. I walked outside, sat on the curb, and cracked it open while a few neighbors came by to shake my hand. One guy, never met him before, just nodded and said, "Thanks for swinging the hammer." I looked at him and said, "Didn't even have to lift it. They hit themselves in the face with it." Truth is, I didn't want any of this attention. I didn't want to be the guy who took down the HOA or the face of anti-trail activism or whatever title the news wanted to slap on me. I just wanted to fix my bench, plant my tomatoes, and live on the land my uncle left me without someone trying to turn it into a bike lane. But if it took a TV spot, a viral meme, and a public takedown to make that clear, so be it. I didn't ask for the fight, but I damn well finished it. It's been 6 months now, and the only thing cutting through my backyard is sunlight. No orange spray paint, no stakes, no signs with fake community slogans. Just grass, garden beds, and a bench that's a little crooked but still standing, same as me. I fixed Uncle Bob's workbench mostly, kept the busted leg. I could have replaced it, sure, but I braced it instead. Steel bracket, couple of lag bolts, and a reminder that not everything broken needs to be erased. Sometimes it just needs to hold. I still keep the original survey map pinned to the inside of the shop door. Not because I need it anymore, but because it belongs there. Right next to the photo of Bob holding a fish the size of a small child and grinning like he just stole it from God's cooler. The HOA didn't bother me again. In fact, a few weeks after the dust settled, 2 of the new board members came by with a fruit basket and what I think was an actual sincere apology. I told them I didn't hold a grudge, but they might want to reconsider their obsession with sidewalk symmetry. No. We all chuckled awkwardly, and then I used the pears to make a cobbler. People wave more now when they walk by. A few neighbors even pitched in to help me replant some of the flowers that got trampled during Blair's little green corridor campaign. One lady brought me native milkweed starts because she said Bob would have wanted monarchs in the yard. She was right. Funny thing is, the community got a lot more walkable the second they stopped trying to force a path through my damn property. Now kids cut through the corner lot with permission, dogs sniff my mailbox, and a guy named Carl jogs by every morning and shouts, "Still gray," at my house like it's a motivational chant. I wave back with my coffee, and every now and then someone I've never met comes up and says, "You're that guy, right, from the news?" I smile and say, "Used to be." Because now, I'm just the guy fixing a leaky faucet, the guy putting mulch around tomato plants, the guy whose backyard is exactly what it was always meant to be. His. And if I hear one more person suggest a community bike station next to my shed, well, I've still got the shovel.